Hey, everybody, we are live. You are looking at Congressman Chris Pappas of the wonderful state of New Hampshire, who is running for the U.S. Senate open seat. Jeanne Shaheen, the incumbent senator, Democrat, is retiring. Congressman has been in the House since elected in 2018, sworn in
Mhm.
2019. All right, I want to start on the most important thing by far about this race. Your ties to the incredible Puritan Backroom Restaurant, which every single candidate uh, ever for office goes to, presidential candidate and otherwise, and the possibility that your ancestors invented the chicken tender. Let's talk about that, and then we'll talk
Yep.
about the race. You got to give the people what they want, Congressman.
First things first, and it's often the first thing that comes up when I'm campaigning too. And I have to say that a wise reporter once did
Oh,
a nice
come on.
piece about the chicken tenders and their role in
Correct.
national politics.
That
So
guy,
I
that guy's
that's
a
on my
has
bookshelf
been.
at home. No, so look, it's nothing that we ever, sort of claimed, but it's been chronicled by, all sorts of outlets, including the New York Times a couple years ago. So, look, we sell a lot of fried chicken at our restaurant. More importantly, it's a community gathering spot
It's a great
where sort of
spot.
people come together and you feel at home. There's no pretense, and you often run into a lot of people that you know. So, for me, that was my entry into the sort of greater world out there. It's hard to tell when you're in a family business like that where the business stops, where the community starts. It's really
Did
one
you
and the
work
same.
there as a
So,
kid?
yeah, I was dying to work there, and I think they made me wait until I was almost 14
Yeah,
to
you gotta meet
to
child
start.
labor
And
laws. Yeah.
yeah. When you're a family, you can get around that. And so
Yeah,
I
it's true.
bussed and I washed dishes, and that was the best. And once I graduated from college, I came back and officially joined the family business and co-owned the business. Was a day-to-day manager. You're very hands-on when you have a place like that. I mean, we're 7 days a week, close 2 days a year, have a staff of about 230 people. So there's a lot going on all the time. It's a lot of hard
It's
work.
it's a great place, and I did write about it in my first book, and I would urge people if you do get by the way, Manchester, very underrated town, I would say.
Yes.
As is Des Moines. I've been to Manchester and Des Moines a lot because of politics, but very underrated town. Puritan Backroom, literally, I mean, I've probably been there 50 times in my years covering politics because every politician does events there, which is good for business. Um,
Yeah.
Tell me how you first I know you served in a bunch of elected offices before the House. Tell me what attracted you to politics? I know it's New Hampshire, and obviously you were in a family business that is a restaurant, but is also very much kind of a must stop on the political. So I assume you got exposed to that at a
Yeah.
relatively young age. But tell me what drew you in, and I guess as importantly, what's kept you in? Because I know a lot of people who are like, "Oh my god, this is the worst."
Yep.
It is a challenging time to be a politician. So talk about your origins and then why you've kept doing it.
Yeah. Well, I benefited from being in a state where politics is a volunteer part-time business. And
Yeah.
so I was able to maintain my business responsibilities while figuring out ways to serve on the side. I did that as a state legislator, as a county official, as a member of a board in the executive branch, something called the Executive Council, which is really powerful in New
Yep.
Hampshire government. And so for me, it was always just maintaining a connection to the community that way and looking to give back. And there are so many outlets in New Hampshire to be able to do that. But I think my interest in politics really dates to the New Hampshire primaries when
Mhm.
I was a kid growing up. And I would run into these national political leaders, senators, governors, folks who were on the verge of becoming president that were traipsing through our restaurant and greeting people. So I remember that the first campaign I can remember is the '88 campaign. And I remember, and I still cherish a picture with Bob and Elizabeth Dole and
Yep.
met Michael Dukakis and all the other big players at the time. And it just gave you the sense that that you mattered. It didn't matter who you were, but that they wanted to have conversations with you. They wanted to sort of find out what was on people's minds out there, and just the accessibility that you have in New Hampshire, I think is so important. Whether that's in the primary or whether you're an elected official
It's
today, the
great.
connection you have to people, and so that's sort of the hallmark of our system. And I think I just found ways to be plugged into it. And it was really, Donald Trump's election as president when I did some soul searching, thinking,
Hmm.
okay, do I want to go beyond what I'm doing right now, which is a balancing act between, running this business and serving in office, and take that next step? And I don't want to do this until I'm 80, frankly. I want to do this for a window of time where I feel like I'm responding and meeting the moment and doing something positive for New Hampshire and the country. So that's why I've served a few terms in the House and why I'm seeking to go to the Senate right now to win a seat that's going to be really important in terms of the overall balance of
And I
it.
want to talk about that. I will note for people who are not as familiar, it is so funny to me is this is actually awesome. New Hampshire has as close to a sort of citizen legislature as you will get in the state, in that you'll know this better than me, but there's like 400. I mean, there's a huge number of people
Yes.
who serve in elected office because it is, to your point, it's a part-time job.
Fourth largest legislative body in the English speaking world, I think is what
Yes.
we say.
And
400
it's
House
wild.
members.
Yeah.
They earn an annual salary of $100 per year. Of course,
Right.
you have taxes taken out of that, so it's less than 100.
Right.
And it's really dedicated people, all across the board that sign up and run. So it's like a volunteer position, which is, I don't know, kind of refreshing when you have regular people who bring their real life experiences to the table.
I remember as a I remember as a very young reporter, I thought I was in New Hampshire doing something, and I remember I talked to someone, I can't even remember who it is anymore, but they were like a state legislature, and I thought
Mhm.
I had landed the interview of my life, and then somebody was like, there's like 430 of them, and I was like, "Wait, what?"
Every third person here
Yeah.
is a state rep, has been a state rep, will be a state rep. So it's part of
I
the
just
culture.
remember that feeling of thinking I had found gold, and then they were like, "Not really." All right, so I wanna talk about this race in particular and then talk about as it fits into the broader kind of, the map.
Mhm.
Um, New Hampshire is a state that Kamala Harris won, but relatively narrowly. I mean, it's not a D plus 30 state. Tell me, you, I would say, somewhat amazingly avoided any significant the primary. For folks who don't know, this is one of the latest primaries. Primary September 8th. Is that right, Congressman? I know it's in early
That's
September.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. The 8th.
You avoided a primary challenge. Let's talk about how the hell you did that.
Well, look, I mean, I think it's a moment where people want to be heard, and there are a lot of different voices that are out there in the arena right now, and that's healthy for our democracy. But I represent half the state. I
Yeah.
think I've built a good rapport with voters and a brand that people know and understand. And when you're a Democrat in New Hampshire, you're a New Hampshire Democrat. You show you're different than the national party. For me, it's about bringing my experiences to bear from the small business world, focusing on how we can get stuff done, but not backing down from the big fights of the day, whether that's reproductive freedom, economic fairness, making this country more fair and more just. So I just think that, being here in New Hampshire, if you have a sense of connection to the place, if you've demonstrated an ability to listen and to want to go to bat for your communities, I think that's you're most of the way there with voters. And most voters here are somewhere in between. This is not a left wing or a right
Mhm.
wing state. This is a state with a ton of ticket splitters still. That's how you get the results we've seen in recent elections. Democrats winning some hard fought races for federal office, Republicans running the table for state office. They now have pretty significant numbers in the state legislature. And this was Harris's closest state in the last election.
Yep.
Hillary Clinton carried New Hampshire by 3,000 votes in 2016. Maggie Hassan's first race in 2016 was a 1,017 vote margin. And if you go back to the 2000 election, which I know you remember,
Oh, man.
um,
Yes, I
you
do.
know, you could have discounted Florida had New Hampshire voted
That's
for
right.
Gore instead of Bush. That would have settled the election. So oftentimes we're a bellwether, and I think we're going to be right there in the middle of helping shape the national dynamics this time around. Again with all the independent voters, people are reacting to what they're seeing out there. They're feeling like political leadership is sort of ignoring what's going on in their day to day lives. And I do think this is going to be the kind of moment where people are demanding change and where that goes beyond just sort of a Democratic partisan base,
Mm.
where it reaches into independents and Republicans.
I, I'll note for people who don't follow it as closely, to your point, look, the former Republican senator, Kelly Ayotte, is now the Republican governor of the state. So I think people think of it as I think people naturally think of it as more democratic than its even recent history would suggest. I mean, obviously the Sununu family, which we will get to, uh, Chris Sununu, popular governor, John Sununu, who you may well be running against, was in the United States Senate. The governor of the state was in the United States Senate. I mean, Republicans have shown an ability to win here, right? I mean, this is not. It's to your point. This is not. I'm from Connecticut. You'd much rather be a Democrat in Connecticut than a Republican in Connecticut. Doesn't mean Republicans can't win, but New Hampshire is more evenly divided. I want to go to something you mentioned, which is one of the reasons I love doing these conversations with candidates is you are out talking to people uh,
Mhm.
every single day. Tell me what they ask you about, what they're worried about, what they're hopeful for. Is it a lot of Trump? Is it less Trump than maybe someone like me sitting in Northern Virginia would think? Like, what's to use my kids' words, what's the vibes?
Well, there's definitely a through line of Trump in a lot of the conversations.
Okay.
It may be that people are citing the latest, craziest thing that he's said, just the sort of incompetence and corruption that's fully out in the open right now. Or it could just be that they're talking about policies that he's pushed that are impacting their lives. So that's definitely going to be the backdrop of this campaign. But I do think that we've got to get beyond just the personality of Trump. I mean, that's been
Mhm,
litigated in many elections. And I think in order to build the sort of broad based coalition you need to win in a state like this and so many other of the swing states, you need to attract people who voted for Trump in the last election, people
mhm,
who like what he says about certain issues or maybe where he starts on certain issues.
mhm.
He misses it so much in the execution
I
of
think
what his
it's
administration
such a
has
good
been
point.
doing.
I always say he's a pretty good he is not a bad diagnoser of problems. His solutions are, I would say, very often misguided. That's a really good it's the execution oftentimes. But go ahead, keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, yeah. So I just think that the conversations are yes about sort of the national conversation, the dynamics, the fact that Trump is in the White House and doing things they don't like, but it's also more personal than I've felt in a long time. People just feel like things are tougher than they've ever been, and this isn't a development that it just spans the last year and a half. This goes
Mm,
back years and decades. And so we've got to talk about change in a way that isn't just about beating the other team and standing up to a reckless president. This has to be creating new opportunities, a new paradigm so that we can create a fairer economy and more opportunity, that we're making progress on things like housing and healthcare and childcare. These have been problems for a long time, but it feels like it's really come home to roost in this period. And to make matters worse, they're hearing the same rhetoric everyone is that Donald Trump thinks affordability is a hoax, thinks
yeah.
inflation is great, and all that. So he's neglecting just the lived experiences of people, and I think they're just clamoring to have their voice heard right now. So yeah, I think there's a lot out there in the conversation. It's often hard to distill, but I would say that
Yeah.
accountability and affordability are the two
Mm.
main streams that you tend to hear the most about from voters.
I want to talk about we've seen, throughout this primary season, and I think we're almost exactly halfway through it right now. You've seen a lot of your colleagues, many of whom are on the Republican side, but lose as they try to run statewide. We saw Randy Feenstra in Iowa lose the Republican nomination for governor. Dusty Johnson in South Dakota lose the nomination for governor. There have been successes. Mike Collins obviously won a Senate race, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say, and I hear this a lot, people say, you know what? Like, I just having that rep, Chris Pappas, the rep part is the most problematic. How do you deal with? You have not been in Washington all that long, right? You're in your third term currently, right? But
Fourth.
fourth. I'm doing the math wrong. I'm so stuck in 2024. How do you deal with people who say like, "Well, you've been there and you haven't fixed it," or "It's still bad"? Like because I do think incumbency when I first started covering politics was this massive gift. Basically, it was really hard to lose as an incumbent. I feel like that's kind of flipped. Like, what's your take on that and how people view Washington? Forget Republicans or Democrats, just how they view Washington.
Well, I mean, the situation in Washington right now it's ridiculous. I mean, it's so incredibly dysfunctional and chaotic. And there are those actors, including the president, that want to make it that way, so people will get just disoriented and they'll be able to grab onto more power. But people want to see the fight. They want to
Mhm,
know that you're not satisfied with the way that things are, whether that is in our political system in Washington or whether that's out on our main streets in terms of our economic way of life. So I think you just have to continue to bring the urgency and the notion that we've got to fix a broken system. We have to be able to reestablish the ability of our institutions to deliver for people, to translate the will of the people into policies that will actually make their lives better. And I think the pace, frankly, during the Biden years was far too slow.
mhm.
If you look at what was pushed with respect to price negotiation for prescription drugs, right? It was limited, it was just under Medicare, and you had to wait a few years for the lower prices to be negotiated and to kick in. That's not good enough. People need an immediate benefit, and they need to see that sort of connectivity between what they're saying out there, their votes at the ballot box, and the ability of Washington to move on something in a much swifter fashion. So I think I come from this school, especially given my small business background, where I am just not satisfied with the way things are working. And I am part of a group of reformers that came into the House in 2018. We do things a little bit differently. We're fighting to get big money out of our politics, to take on Citizens United and the super PACs, to fight for tougher ethical reforms, to ban stock trading and participation in prediction markets by members of Congress and members of the administration. And there are some members of both parties that don't like some of those things. They like things the way that they are. And so this has to be a true change election. And we need people that are grounded in their districts, not in Washington, D.C., to be doing this work.
I wanna follow up about sort of the Democratic Party brand. Um, everything that I know suggests this should be a good election for Democrats. Historic midterm, trends, Donald Trump is not popular. People are worried about the economy and they don't trust him. At the same time, when I see polling, it's the Democratic Party is no great shakes. Why is that, in your opinion? And then what? And this, some of this may you may have touched on, but if you want to expand on it, feel free. Why is the Democratic brand where it is? And then, are there specific issues or specific policies on which you would say we need to run on this? You mentioned it can't just be about Trump, but can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, look, Democrats lost the most important election of our lifetime. And for Democratic rank and file voters out there, they feel like the party blew it. And now we've got Donald Trump as president and Republican majorities that are giving us policies that are taking this country in a dangerous direction. So I think it's pretty obvious why people, including Democratic Party members, are not happy with party leadership, are not happy with their political allegiances right now. We have to do better. And frankly, the party leaders were flat-footed at the beginning of Trump's second term. I think wrongfully assuming that this was going to just be a continuation of what they had
Yeah,
already lived through, that there
100%.
would be some courageous voices in the administration that would step up and do the right thing. They're not there, and there are no John McCain's, frankly, in the Senate that are turning their thumbs down to the bad policies these days either. So, we just have to continue to use every lever possible. We have to continue to show the fight, and we have to focus on economic fairness, on supporting working families, on rebuilding the middle class. That has to be the centerpiece of the Democratic Party. And I think in this environment where people are paying far too much for housing and healthcare, this reckless war that everyone I talk to opposes, and they're seeing the pinch in terms of high gas prices. We've got to respond to that. We've got an opportunity now to talk to voters that are well beyond the traditional Democratic coalition. And so this is a moment of remaking I think, the brand of the Democratic Party nationally. And that's not going to come from Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer. It's not going to come
Mhm.
from Ken Martin. It's going to come from states like New Hampshire. We get to decide what's best for our communities and what's best for the future. And so collectively, state by state, district by district, we're going to see this next chapter of the Democratic Party be written. We need to build a big tent. We need to be willing to give people some slack to decide how to run their campaigns and what makes a difference to folks in their states. And then once the dust settles from the midterms, I think we'll be able to more effectively sort of aggregate that into something that helps set the stage for 2028. But right now, we should be working hard at the local level to put a spin on what it means to be a Democrat. But at the core of that, it has to be economic fairness, opportunity, supporting workers, supporting a freer, fairer society. I think that's something that voters are going to respond to.
I want to talk about the general election in a minute. Before I do that, though, I am interested in. I think most people who are not in politics, and certainly who don't serve, think that bipartisanship is dead in Washington. You are someone who, and I forget the exact number, but you are certainly ranked uh, quite highly in terms of Democrats willing to work across the aisle. How have you found your Republican colleagues in I guess you're 2/3 of the way or 3/4 of the way through your 4th term? How have you found that? Is it worse, better, or about the same as you expected?
I think it's for folks who watch Congress or who sort of consume politics but don't spend time in Washington. I would often tell them that there are actual ways that you can still relate to people and make things happen. I think it's harder in this second Trump term than maybe it was even the first time around.
Mhm.
Just relationships have become frayed. Things are incredibly dark. I mean, the stakes are so high, but yet, I think we owe it to the people we represent to try to move the ball forward. And look, it doesn't mean you have to back off of your values, what your state believes in, the big items that you're fighting for. But if you can get something done for veterans and prevent them from being foreclosed on, then you should take the opportunity, like I did last year, to work on a bill and get it through in a bipartisan fashion. So I think that's always the sort of responsibility that we have. We can fight on the big issues of the day, but let's figure out how to take some steps forward. Now, there have been some disappointing moments over the last term where you haven't seen Republicans come to the table in a way where we could get things done. Healthcare is a great example of that. I mean,
Mm.
these ACA credits expired at the end of the last year. There was a flurry of conversations happening, positive, productive conversations. But that just there weren't enough people in the room to give that the legs it needed to get done. So I think that we are at a dangerous moment where we have this race to the bottom with partisan gerrymandering, particularly for the
Mhm.
House, which is going to put members' attention only to a primary electorate and not to their entire district or state. And that means that people will increasingly believe that politics is performance, that it's not about being serious about legislating. And you'll have less people that are willing to get in rooms like that and hash it out. So, we're doing some things right now that are actually positive, don't get a lot of attention. We got a bipartisan transportation bill that's
Mhm.
moving to
Yep.
succeed the infrastructure law. We've got a housing bill. Now there's agreement on it. And it
Yep.
certainly is, just scratching the surface of what we need to do in terms of national housing policy. But there's some really good provisions in there that are going to help my state and my communities make some progress. So this shouldn't be about just owning the other side and running out the clock. Like we've got a responsibility to do some things in the here and now because some of these issues just can't wait. So I just think that's kind of the New Hampshire
Yeah.
way of doing business. I've
Yep.
learned that here, and that's what people expect.
The gerrymandering point, I know most people aren't focused on it, and, if you don't follow politics closely, maybe you don't care, but it is going to get worse before it gets better, people. 2027 and 2028, you're gonna see even more maps, and to the congressman's point, you're going to see maximalist attempts to draw these districts, which will create an incentive structure that is the opposite of what we want. All right, let's talk about the general election. Now, I know primary is not over, so for people who are unfamiliar, former U.S. Senator John Sununu, the son of the former governor, the brother also of the former governor, is running. He has Donald Trump's endorsement. Scott Brown, who, yes, that's that Scott Brown from Massachusetts, senator, is also running. He lives in New Hampshire now. My presumption is that John Sununu will win this race, Congressman. Is that your presumption too?
Well, he's got Trump's endorsement. and looking over the last few states that have had primaries where senators have been challenged or where there's a competition, the Trump endorsement seems to carry the day, and that seems to be borne out
Yeah.
by kind of the information we're getting from voters in New Hampshire and the polling. And it's interesting because John Sununu decided he wanted a career in politics again, and decided in order to do that he needed to seek out Trump's endorsement, and he got that complete and total endorsement. I think voters in New Hampshire are going to want a little bit more independence than that, but he felt like he needed to do that in this campaign, and I think that's indicative of just sort of what's wrong with this political moment. It's got to be more than just about pleasing one person. It's got to be about doing what's right for New Hampshire.
What's the choice on offer in your mind? Let's assume it's Sununu. I mean, if it's Scott Brown, we'll do another one of these because it'll
Yeah.
be a different race. But let's assume it's Sununu. What in your mind? And obviously, the former senator is going to have his own take on this, and I'm welcome to have him on and talk about it as well. But when you is the choice as you just put it, someone who in your mind you are someone who is kind of willing to work across the aisle, willing to see this less in partisan terms, and he is an acolyte of Trump. Like, how do you think the choice will be framed to voters this fall?
Well, look, he's got a big family name. You mentioned it,
He does.
and Tim Scott, as he was trying to recruit someone to run in New Hampshire, said he wanted a Sununu to run, and I think there are 8 siblings, so he had a big list to work through
Yeah,
before he
John
came back
Senior
to
is probably
John, who
too
was
old at this point, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. So John was in the Senate for a term, was defeated in 2008
Yep.
by Gene Sheen.
Yep.
And interestingly, I mean, he was defeated because he was down the line for a very unpopular Republican president, supported war in the Middle East, supported policies to give away huge tax breaks to those at the top, while voting against the interests of working class people. And so he's repeating the same pattern right now. And so we'll see how it works out for him this time. But I think that's part of the dynamic here. This is about someone who is joined at the hip with corporate special interests versus someone who comes out of our Main Street economy. We got to focus on how we grow this economy, not by giving more tax breaks to people who don't need it in big corporations, but by investing in the middle class. And when he left the Senate, he became part of that revolving door that everyone hates about Washington, D.C. Worked for a lobbying firm and for Wall Street firms and for interests that help keep prescription drugs far too high and prevent Americans from accessing health care. So I think all that is going to be part of the conversation here in terms of who's fit to represent the people of New Hampshire right now. And this should be about going back to someone who was rejected before and whose ideas were not in line with the people of this state. This is about what's right for the future. And I think that's an important case we've got to make. We got to think about what comes next. And what comes next has got to be a focus on economic fairness, on investing in our communities, and on someone who's got an approach that means New Hampshire comes first, that we can stand up to a reckless president when he's wrong and create the dynamics for change in Washington. I mean, good luck making the argument that it's time for Donald Trump to get another vote in the U.S. Senate. That's what Republicans, might be advocating for and supporting Sununu in this effort.
I continue to tell. I'm glad you say the what comes next thing. I think that's really important. I continue to tell anyone I talk to that, like, look, the Trump era will end. Right? I mean, I don't think he can run for a third term. I think he's constitutionally barred from doing so. And at some point, we're going to have to move beyond this and start thinking of, like, well, okay, what are problems that need solutions? What solutions are there on offer? Where do the two parties stand on this? I just feel like Trump is such an oxygen consumer that it's so hard to have a conversation about politics that's not just about him, but I really do think it is important to look forward. I would be remiss, and I will not be remiss, to not in our last minutes here, and thank you for spending so much time with me. I want to ask you, what's the lay of the land in your estimation in New Hampshire? I think New Hampshire is going to have the first primary, maybe the first vote in 2028. I know you'd be in favor of that. What's the lay of the land there? I hear positive things about Pete Buttigieg and his organization there. What's you obviously have been around this state in and out of elected office as a small business owner. Where is the party and who do you see? I'm not going to ask who do you like, but who do you see up there?
Well, we're seeing a lot of them already. And I don't want to start rattling off names because
You'll
I'm going to
forget
forget
someone.
someone
Yeah.
who probably showed up and did an event with me here. But it's going to be a huge field. And it's interesting. Everyone who's coming in and dipping their toe in the water is getting a big crowd.
Hmm.
People just want to know and think about what's over the horizon and what comes
Yeah.
next. They want to be part of that conversation. And so I think this is a really exciting moment for the New Hampshire primary and sort of for our politics. As we sort of make our case to the DNC and say that we don't choose for the rest of the country. This is about creating the right conversation at the community level where regular people have direct impact and direct input in terms of these presidential campaigns. We're already seeing that happen. So I think it's just incredibly exciting. It appears to me that people are making their choices in terms of who they like this early, less about ideology and sort of
Yeah.
where they fall on the moderate to progressive spectrum, but it's much more about who's ready to meet this moment, who represents the future, who's gotten some stuff done in their own right, whether that be in their elected office in their state under their purview. So I think everyone's getting a lot of looks right now, and it's going to be the typical sort of New Hampshire primary experience where these candidates are going to have to meet people 3, 4, 5 times in order for the voter to be sure if they want to
And it's
punch
gonna
the
be
ticket.
cold. That's the only thing. I love
Yeah.
New England, I love New Hampshire, but man, I just I could go for, like, an Arizona primary at some point. Doesn't have to be first, just so um, Congressman Chris Pappas, look, folks, I try to interview everyone running for the US Senate. The congressman made time for me. I'm very appreciative of it. I will say this, if you're in New Hampshire, go to the Puritan back room, get the chicken tenders, and shout out to Tara Sargent. Go get a mudslide. You will thank me later. Trust me. It's great.
2 per person limit on the mudslides, but
Yeah, well, that's probably
unlimited
smart.
chicken tenders.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's for
Ranch
sure.
Vegas, you can't have people with 10 mudslides in them walking around. I mean, that's a whole different thing. All right, Congressman, I appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone who joined us live and anyone who checked this out. Congressman, I always do this. Let me give people, I forgot to do it, but let me end on this. If people want to know more about you, donate to you, know more about the race, where should they go?
Yeah, look, you can find us at chrispappas.org. This is going to be a key race. It is within the margin of error and is going to be a tough fight with lots of local and national interests. And it's hard to see how Democrats are able to take back the Senate if we take a step backward and lose this seat in New Hampshire. So we're fighting hard to keep this seat blue and need everyone's help in order to deliver the message about change, about lowering costs, about a fair economy, about taking on a reckless president, and getting our country and our democracy on a better path for the future. And I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. Based on the conversations I'm having, I'm seeing a lot of people who have never been involved in the political process show up. People who are all over the board in terms of what they believe. Just know this is a moment where we've got to take matters into our own hands, and that's what we're seeking to do in this race.
All right, Congressman, I appreciate your time. Thank you for everyone who joined us. Take care. Be well. Stay safe out there.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, Congressman, be well.
Take care. Yeah, thanks, you too.